Good morning or afternoon or evening to you guys. Hope you're having a good start to the new year. I'm over at Crosswalk today, as you can see. Church offices are closed today, um, but I needed to come in and get some work done. So I'm over at Crosswalk. But we are on Unit 15, Session 3. Unit 15, Session 3. And I know it's been a while. I felt like this break was extra long this year, or maybe it always feels like that. I don't know, but yeah, we're on Unit 15, Session 3. We're picking back up with this series on judgment, and judgment in the Old Testament can be a little repetitive, because we basically know the story, right? Like Israel's unfaithful, God judges them. But I think what's unique about this unit is it talks about the different ways in which judgment occurs. Um, and today, specifically, we're looking at, excuse me, mid morning, got to get going. God's judgment through the nations, right? So, God's judgment through other nations. And I think one of the big things here is understanding like God's sovereignty in this, but also, if you heard the sermon yesterday from Will, who is Pastor Steve's son-in-law, preached an incredible message. If you haven't watched it, I encourage you to go watch it. It was really good. But he talked about basically the theology of suffering, and he talked about how that there's consequences of sin and there's the curse of sin, right? So any trial or hardship we go through is either the consequence of sin or the curse of sin. Consequences of sin being a very practical one. If you think about this in a judicial way, the speed limit is 35 and you're going 50, right? You get a ticket and you have to pay a fine, right? That's a consequence of your sin of breaking the law. If you want to think about it more in a personal sense, if you lie to somebody and then they find out and they don't want to be your friend anymore, that's a consequence of your sin, right? The curse of sin is a little bit different. A curse of sin we really don't have any hold over. When you get sick and ill, right? When it's not like you've smoked all your life and then you get lung cancer, like that is kind of your fault. But like when you just out of the blue, like you get sick, you get diagnosed with something, or maybe someone has he brought this up as an illustration the other day. Maybe it's someone that's born with a special needs child, right? That's not the parents' fault. That's not the kid's fault. That's a curse of the sin in this world, right? So there's consequences that come directly from our actions, and then there's consequences there's things that happen in our world that are just the fact that it's broken. They happen just because of the fact it's broken. So, what we're talking about today, though, this is the consequence of sin. This is the consequence of continual rebellion against God. But I wanted to make that distinction because it's very easy for us to look at the Old Testament and associate all of that with how trials just work in our life. God does not treat us like he did Israel. He does in the sense that he's very patient with us, but we don't, we're not punished on a personal level like Israel was as a nation. God is very patient with us. One day he will judge the world. And sometimes we have to face the natural judgment of our own sin and our own bad choices, right? But nonetheless, God is faithful through all of it. And so we're in 2 Chronicles chapter 36. And we are just going to quickly just kind of go over this section. So verses 11 through 14, it says that Judah refuses God's ways, right? Zedekiah was the king here. He's one of the last kings that remained. Was a wicked, evil person. He was 21 years old when he came to reign. He was not mature. He was not a man of God, all of that. So, you can guess what happens. He refuses to establish the kingdom in a way that God would desire. And so what happens is God raises up a messenger, right? So we see that in verses 15 through 16, and we see that Judah rejects God's word, right? So they're doing wrong, they're doing evil, and then they reject God's word, right? And this is a little different of a narrative than what we see in the Judges, right? If you go read the book of Judges, you see over and over again, it's a cycle of sin, and then God sends a messenger, and the people respond, and that judge delivers them, right? But then they go back into it. Here, no one was saving them. No one was drawing them back to the heart of God, because you had generations, not just one generation, but you had multiple generations that had turned from God, multiple kings that had turned from God, and they were quickly about to be conquered by Babylon, which is what we're going to see here next. Verses 17 through 21, we see that Judah experiences God's judgment. All right. A little Old Testament interpretation, helpful hint here. Anytime you see the Chaldeans mentioned, especially in these later books in the Old Testament, it's almost always talking about Babylon. That was kind of like their land, the land of the Chaldeans. If you think about it too, Abraham was actually, when he moved to a land that God would show him, I believe he came out of the Chaldees, Ur of the Chaldees, I think is what it is. Anyways, I'm gonna look it up. I'm 98.5% sure that's right. Probably should have fact checked, but so all the way back then, right? Like you see that it's almost like full circle here. But anyways, of course you've got King Nebuchadnezzar that's the ruler of these people, and we get into those stories, I believe, in the next few weeks. So long story short, Judah refuses God's ways, Judah rejects God's word, and then Judah experiences God's judgment. And this would be pretty much the last straw for Israel as a nation. Remember, the northern kingdom's already been captured, and this is the southern kingdom that is captured. Happened in 586 BC. And so from that point, we're going to see them go into a season of captivity for about 70 years, and then God releases them back, and we see some cool stories, like the story of Ezra and Nehemiah. But outside of that gets close to ending the Old Testament. But as we think about this, and this is really this is at the top of your curriculum, has a main point, and I think it's so relevant because you read the Old Testament and it's like, that's spot on. The people were so stubborn. They were so stubborn, and there's a difference between stubborn and stupid. Right? Like, we don't say that people were stupid, even though we probably could, right? But stubbornness is just, it's just being like hard-headed, right? We can say someone is stubborn without being mean. You say someone's stupid, and that's hard to make that not mean, right? But if you're being stubborn, it's just like, man, there is an easier way to do this, right? If you think of Israel, they were trying to establish a kingdom, right? Not a bad desire, not a bad thought, but they were stubborn in the way they went about it, because they circumvented God. They went around him, and they tried to establish it in their own way, right? And guys, I hate to say it, but we can be just as stubborn, because we have all these ideas of how we want to make our life better, how we want to orchestrate things with our finances, with our career goals, with everything. And a lot of times we do that by taking your own path, and that path might not be God's path, right? And so ultimately, it's just a stubborn way to go about it. But always think back to Matthew 6, seek first the kingdom, right? Seek first his kingdom, and all these things will be added unto you. So I hope as we talk about Judah's rebellion, right? Israel's rebellion here in the Old Testament and their judgment, just like all of the Old Testament, like, don't miss the message to yourself in the story, right? Because I think it's really helpful for us as we contextualize the Old Testament and make sure it's applying to us, because it does. We just have to make sure we're applying it well. So thank you, guys. I hope you have a great week. If there's any way I can be a resource to you, please don't hesitate to reach out. And we will see y'all this Sunday for the first Sunday school of 2023.